it's actually a little bit broader than the problem of Sydney's water supplies. In fact, it's huge. What I've done is to introduce the thing looking at history, because history tells you about the pollution of air and water as a result of basically class. So if I can start. And forgive me if I read this, it's very complicated, and if I try and wing it, I'll miss out all the juicy bits. So here we go. Clean air and water are crucial for human survival. In the earliest period of human history, when people lived as nomadic tribes under a political economy known as primitive communism, the idea of polluting water sources would have been total anathema to those people. Different tribes had a mutual interest in preserving freshwater sources, especially because they were nomadic. And that was a fundamental element in their folklore and in their spiritual beliefs. Serious pollution of watercourses began to occur frequently in the later eras of slavery, feudalism and capitalism. Sometimes this was due to ignorance. Pipes used by the ancient Romans for articulating drinking water were made out of lead, which was toxic, and the lead would have leached into the water and done a lot of damage, as we now know. However, all too often, the source of the problem was known, but the desire for profits and imperial conquest overrode the necessity for conservation of fresh water. In the feudal period, toxic materials used to prepare gunpowder, which was a novel introduction, at least in Europe, would have entered local watercourses, and the felling of vast areas of forests for construction of naval shipping would have led to soil erosion and pollution of rivers with algae. Over the last 2 or 3 centuries, colonial era settlers, and I use the word in inverted commas, from nations with the most developed economic systems, invaded lands occupied by people still living as nomadic tribes, including in Australia, and poisoned watering places in order to annihilate or drive out the indigenous people and to exploit the land's natural resources. Under the reign of laissez-faire capitalism during the Industrial Revolution, the problem of toxic materials, including dyes, slag, acid, arsenic and other new chemical pollutants, were dumped from the dark satanic mills into rivers and canals. Watercourses were also polluted by human waste because vast numbers of workers had to be brought together to operate the new industries. By 1850 in London, the Thames had become, in effect, an open sewer, and on one occasion the stench became so overpowering that the politicians were forced to leave the recently opened Houses of Parliament and flee the city for their country estates. The British government subsequently built the Thames Embankment sewage system. It was a magnificent engineering achievement which benefited the entire city, but its construction was long overdue and was initiated primarily by the government's need to control the country, not to improve conditions for ordinary Londoners. The 20th century brought in a new range of threats to our water. For more than 50 years, the Vietnamese people have suffered terrible long-term effects, including horrible birth defects from the use by the US of the defoliant Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. I believe the US has offered Vietnam no compensation for this horrible act of war. In Australia, there have been mass deaths of river fish because of the combined effects of fertiliser runoff and the cultivation of crops like cotton that require extraction of huge amounts of river water. Now, I want to talk about the other question, which is on the boil at the moment, and that's the question about the proposed gold mine out west near Blaney in New South Wales. The mining company Regis Resources recently sought permission to build a gold mine and a tailings dam near Blaney in western New South Wales. The proposed dam area is a sacred site, and local Aboriginal people objected. The application was approved by the Federal Minister for the Environment, but only on condition that the dam had to be relocated. Regis Resources was outraged. They said that relocating the dam would make the project financially unviable. The National Party also objected. Its leader, David Littleproud, claimed that because local Aboriginal people appealed against the dam proposal on the basis of their culture. Therefore, they were, he implied, not concerned about environmental issues, which is absolute nonsense. Littleproud's separation of the cultural and environmental issues is very deceptive. In Aboriginal culture, the rivers, fish, animals, and all the environmental elements needed to sustain life are all part of their spiritual beliefs, which is part of their culture. And environmental damage, in essence, constitutes not only a risk to their well-being, but a violation of their culture. Littleproud claimed that there would be very little risk to the environment, but the dam would actually be at the headwaters and springs of the local Balubala River, and the headwaters are a sacred site. The proposed dam construction would definitely place the site at serious risks for the following reasons. Firstly, gold mining tailings contain cyanide, which is a deadly poison. Secondly, dams for tailings of liquid waste are notorious for leakage and for partial or even total collapse. And thirdly, the project's construction cost is estimated at $1 billion. So the dam is going to be very big and contain a huge volume of fluid, and a dam collapse would ruin the river's downstream environment. BHP has just reached a multi-billion-dollar settlement with 600,000 indigenous Brazilian people who sued the company because of the collapse of its Mariana Dam, that was a tailings dam as well, which killed 19 people, caused a loss of 200,000 homes, and destroyed the ecology of a major river. Water pollution is not just limited to fresh water. Over the last 50 years, the Great Barrier Reef has been ravaged by bleaching because of climate change and fertiliser runoff from the Queensland cane fields. Coastal areas of many nations have also been subject to horrible pollution from oil tankers or other marine vessels, and we saw this recently in Sydney's eastern suburbs. And some coastal areas, including Pearl Harbor, are now threatened by massive oil pollution from the corroding fuel tanks of naval vessels sunk during military conflict. The Japanese government also wants to dump highly toxic liquid radioactive waste from the badly damaged Fukushima nuclear plant into the sea offshore from Japan. Nuclear power, which is a spin-off from the development of nuclear weapons, consumes huge quantities of fresh water and is a potential source of pollution of fresh water and seawater. Now to the great villains of the day, the PFAS compounds. For those of you who really want to know, PFAS stands for polyfluoroalkyl substances. There are others, which I'll tell you about, but I won't bother to go into the chemical background of those because I don't have it with me yet. PFAS compounds have been around since the 1940s. There are more than 14,000 different types. But the two most commonly known are described by the initials PFOA and PFOS. PFAS chemicals are widely used in industry, for example in waterproofing fabrics and making carpet stain resistant. According to the article which I've just been given by Dora, that's a very interesting article because it implies that the PFAS has been used extensively throughout some of the power stations, which is now a problem because a lot of them will need to be demolished and we don't know where the pollution will go. PFAS chemicals are widely used, as I say, in waterproofing fabrics, etc. They're also used in the production of many items, including non-stick frying pans. Remember this when you're doing your cooking. Cosmetics, and even dental floss. And they're used by the military and by civilian authorities in fighting fires and in firefighting training. Residents in homes close to RAAF bases near Sydney and Newcastle have received government compensation for water pollution resulting from the use of foam PFAS in firefighting training at military sites. PFAS compounds are highly dangerous known as the forever chemicals. They don't break down fully in the natural environment, and they can spread throughout water. The World Health Authority categorises PFOA as a Category 1 human carcinogen. PFOS is also a suspected carcinogen. Medical authorities in the US and in Europe say the few PFAS chemicals that have been the subject of proper scientific investigation are associated with, wait for it, low birth weight, reduced kidney function, thyroid disease, increased cholesterol levels, suppression of the immune system, altered sex hormone levels, child development issues, reduced vaccine response, and cancer of the liver, kidneys and testicles. Apart from that, they're okay. Bad joke. In the US, the industrial mega corporation 3M has recently been forced to pay US $10.3 billion to water authorities after 4,000 lawsuits were taken out against 3M and other chemical companies over PFAS pollution. 3M ceased production of some PS chemicals in 2005, and industrial use of PFOA and PFOS chemicals has been banned in the United States, but 3M now wants the government to accept a different PFAS chemical to replace PFOA as a waterproofing agent. Even after all that, they're still pushing the same data. Since 2010, PFAS chemicals have been found in the drinking water of 1.8 million Australians. Recent tests have revealed PFAS in water supplies in Canberra, Newcastle, Hobart and Darwin, in the Sydney suburbs of Blacktown, Campbelltown, Emu Plains, Liverpool, North Richmond and Quakers Hill, also in Cairns and Gladstone in Queensland, and in the Melbourne suburb of Footscray. Traces have been detected in Warragamba Dam, which supplies much of Sydney's drinking water. The Medlow Dam in the Blue Mountains has now been disconnected from the local water supply system because of a high level of PFAS in the water, which appears to have been caused by the use of PS to fight a nearby oil truck fire 32 years ago. That's the time span that you can get with these chemicals, because they can move through the water table beneath the ground and cause pollution a long way away from where the original problem started. The US, in June, test shows that the PFAS level in the dam was 4 times higher than the maximum allowed in the US and 300 times higher than the level found in Warragamba Dam. New South Wales Premier Chris Minns says he is, in quotes, considering the US move to limit PFOA and PFOS levels in drinking water to 4 parts per trillion. But just how good are our own regulations? The Canadian government has placed a limit on all 14,000 types of PSAS and has grouped together the allowable level of PFAS components that's found within drinking water to 30 parts per whatever the ratio is. In other words, it says that you cannot sort of divorce one from the other. You have to look at the PFAS chemicals as a whole, not individually. It's placed a limit on all the 14,000 types of PFAS, but the Australian government currently only regulates 3 types of PFAS. The US Environmental Protection Authority says that the safe drinking water level of PFOA and PFOS is 0. That is, there's no safe level for those chemicals. Nevertheless, the US government allows a level of 4 parts per trillion. You might think that's too much, but it's actually the most stringent level in the Western world, and Australia's position is far worse than that of the United States. For PFOS, which is a suspected carcinogen, the Australian government currently accepts a level of 7 parts per million, or 1.7 times greater than the US level, and the National Health and Medical Research Council recommends reducing it to 4 parts per trillion, the same as the US. But for PFOA, which is an acknowledged Category 1 human carcinogen, the Australian government currently allows 560 parts per trillion, and that's 140 times the permissible US rate. 140 times. The National Health and Medical Research Council recommends reducing it to 200 nanograms per litre, but that is still 50 times greater than the US level. Moreover, the acceptable levels are determined by individual state governments. There's no national consistency, and there's no legal obligation for the states to adopt new PFAS level guidelines as recommended by the National Health and Medical Research Council. PFAS compounds pose a tremendous long-term threat to public health. You might reasonably conclude that all PFAS compounds should be banned from industrial production. However, the key to dealing with them lies not just in adopting strict regulations about use, production and introduction of new artificial compounds, but in determining the origin of the problem. And the origin lies in the corporate drive to maximise profits, combined with the drive for ever more powerful and destructive military forces. The ultimate solution to the PFAS chemical pollution problem lies in adopting a totally different social structure, which would abolish the rule of the corporate world, which pollutes for profit, fosters the arms race, and threatens humanity's future.
Right.